welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladia Keriduluale, the headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he's ready to negotiate with everyone involved regarding the war in Ukraine. Ukraine's leader Volodymyr Zelensky says the situation on the front lines in Donbass is difficult and painful. And Ukraine is asking for Russia's removal from the United Nations Security Council and the United Nations as a whole. We'll begin from the Russian capital, Moscow, where President Vladimir Putin says he's ready to negotiate with everyone involved in the process of reaching acceptable solutions regarding the war in Ukraine. And that's according to the Russian state news agency TASS. Speaking at a televised interview, Mr. Putin said, quote, "I don't think it is so dangerous. I think we're moving in the right direction, protecting our national interests and the citizens of the interests of our citizens and our people. And we simply have no other choice but to protect our citizens. We are ready to negotiate with everyone involved in this process about acceptable solutions. But it's up to them. It's not us who is refusing to negotiate, it's them." On the contrary, Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak tweeted in response to Mr. Putin's message saying, Putin needs to come back to reality. Russia single-handedly attacked Ukraine and is killing its citizens. Mr. Podolyak added that Russia doesn't want negotiations, but tries to avoid responsibility. And this is obvious, so we are moving on to the tribunal. And President Putin also hosted a summit of the post-Soviet Commonwealth of Independent States in St. Petersburg. Billed as informal, the gathering is an end-of-year meeting often hosted by Russia. Mr. Putin expressed gratitude to everyone present and thanked them for honoring his invitation to the pre-New Year meeting. The Commonwealth of Independent States was formed following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 and grouped all 15 former Soviet republics except the 3 Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, which never joined. Georgia left the grouping in 2009 over its 2008 war with Russia, and Ukraine pulled out in 2014 following Russia's annexation of Crimea. In the meantime, President Putin has appointed former President Dmitry Medvedev to a new position, that of first deputy chairman of the Military Industrial Commission, and that's according to a decree published by the government. Mr. Putin, who is himself chairman of the commission, signed the decree to introduce changes to the Military Industrial Commission and listed Mr. Medvedev, who is currently deputy chairman of the Security Council of Russia, as its first deputy chairman. The Military Industrial Commission is a permanent body created to ensure the implementation of state policy in the field of the military industrial complex and military technical support for defense, national security, and law enforcement. The Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov, Secretary of the Security Council Nikolai Patrushev, heads of the Foreign Intelligence Service, the FSB, and the National Guard and others are also members of the Commission's board. And Ukraine's Foreign Ministry has asked for Russia to be excluded from the Security Council of the United Nations and from being a member of the United Nations entirely. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine lamented the, quote, illegitimacy of the Russian Federation's presence in the UN Security Council and in the United Nations as a whole. The statement reads, quote, Ukraine calls on member states of the UN to resume the application of the UN Charter in the context of the legitimacy of the Russian Federation's presence in the UN, and to deprive the Russian Federation of its status as a permanent member of the UN Security Council and to exclude it from the UN as a whole. The Foreign Ministry alleges gross violations of the norms and principles of international law, as well as for crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine, in particular for war crimes and crimes against humanity, as well as the crime of genocide. It says Russia could be readmitted upon recommendation for UN membership once it fulfills the conditions for membership of the organization. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had also called for Russia's expulsion from the United Nations in the past. And speaking about Mr. Zelensky, he says the situation at the front in the Donbas region was, quote, difficult and painful and required all of the country's strength and concentration. In his usual nightly address, Mr. Zelensky said power shortages were persisting, with nearly 9 million people remaining without electricity. Mr. Zelensky said power workers repairing the grid after repeated Russian attacks had reconnected many people over Christmas, but that problems remained.
Bakhmut, Crimea, and other areas in Donbas which now require maximum strength and concentration. The situation there is difficult and painful. The occupiers are using all the resources available to them, and these are considerable resources, to achieve at least some advance. And I thank all our boys who stand in their positions, stand strong, and who nevertheless find opportunities not only to lose anything, but to knock out the occupiers, to minus them. I want to thank all those working for energy companies and all the repair crews for the fact that during Saturday and Sunday, on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, it was possible to give people more energy. Of course, power deficits remain. Power outages continue. As of this evening, about 9 million people are disconnected in various regions of Ukraine, but the number and duration of outages are still gradually decreasing. I thank each and everyone who made this result possible.
Let's talk now to Ambassador Joseph Ayalogo, Nigeria's former ambassador to Switzerland and the United Nations in Geneva. He joins us virtually from the British capital, London. Your Excellency, good morning. Compliments of the season. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Morning.
Is it possible for Russia to be kicked out of the United Nations Security Council?
Well, it could be, but the rules of the UN doesn't seem to make it that easy, because you will need to have a consent of the Security Council and the permanent members, and Russia is a permanent member. So I think it will be rather difficult, even though one might say it will be a good pressure to put, but it's not quite easy to achieve, I would say.
How about the UN itself, generally? I remember reading somewhere that there is a resolution that member states can adopt against any individual country, particularly those who wield power, like the Security Council members, the permanent members, where I think it's 3/4 of the entire assembly can vote, and then you have a situation where after those three members, after the 3/4 of members vote, then you have a situation where that resolution has the force of law, even if it does not include the permanent member involved.
Yeah, there are those rules. My worry is that Russia still holds a very big ace, being member of the Security Council, a permanent member. So could actually frustrate some of these measures, established measures. Possibly, perhaps even if we rely on numbers at the General Assembly, when the time comes to speak or to vote, it's possible that many countries, they may not necessarily agree with Russia, but they also see a situation where they don't want to be kicked out from the Security Council. So, in a sense, why it is possible in terms of the rules? Is it achievable? We will see, but Zelensky is asking for it quite rightly, because he believes that there ought to be a lot more pressure on Russia to withdraw its aggression, and perhaps this could be one of it.
Let's look at something else that perhaps, depending on how you look at it, could be a development. The Russian president, in more recent weeks, in December in particular, has spoken several times about his willingness to negotiate, his willingness to engage in peace talks. At the beginning of the war, it was the other way around. It was the Ukrainians who were willing to engage in peace talks and so on. But why do you think the Russians are willing to engage now and others are not willing to engage? He himself admitted, I mean, President Putin admitted that it's not him who is refusing to negotiate. Others are the ones who don't want to negotiate.
Well, first of all, let's consider the seriousness or otherwise of Putin's declaration of wish or intention to engage. Is it really serious? That's one. And a lot of people see it as perhaps just, well, statements of public relations. Because the only thing that would indicate a seriousness to negotiate is to also declare that he is going to start the withdrawal of his troops, which we haven't had so far. We're talking of negotiations. Anyway, so I believe that a lot of other the stakeholders would see his statements in this light, that they're probably not serious. That's why they say, well, he's not serious. So he's still bent on a military, well, success or subduing the Ukrainian troops, and then that the Ukrainians feel that they have to just fight on. And I'm sure that if there is seriousness, and evident seriousness, definitely defined by an indication of a withdrawal of hostilities, Ukraine and all the other parties will definitely key into any negotiation arrangements that will be initiated.
You're a diplomat, Ambassador Ayologo, and I know you have told me on this program before that for diplomacy to work, the two sides have to be willing to start the negotiation and then put all the indices on the table and then compromise back and forth until there is a win-win situation emerges. Perhaps, would I be right to say that those who are refusing to negotiate, regardless of the veracity of their reasons, perhaps are putting diplomacy on the back foot, which may, in the long run, not be helpful?
Well, you know, diplomacy plays it all sorts of ways. You would be fighting, and it's still perhaps also part of the process of diplomacy to fight when you have to fight. And what I would say, my analysis, that on this particular issue now is that the war started with an undeclared aggression, an unexpected aggression from a dominant party, a dominant from the point of well, military hardware and all that, and that for this war to stop, there has to be a commitment on that part, on the part of the aggressor, that it must withdraw. It has to convince others that it needs to withdraw, that it sees the need to withdraw. So that would help along diplomacy. If we are not getting it, then nobody would be easily taken in by declaration of intention to negotiate. That is, it's almost as simple as that.
Given that scenario, perhaps we should look at what was, for many, a diplomatic coup for Ukraine and President Zelensky, his visit to the United States, which by far is Ukraine's single biggest supporter. In fact, many would go as far as to say that Ukraine is still standing today only because of the United States. So to that extent, what do you make of his visit? the risks involved and what he got at the end of the day, were they commensurate?
Well, I would say, of course, it's open knowledge that the UK, United States, is a key supporter of Zelensky and of the Ukrainian war effort. And even in the US, it appeared because of internal political dynamics that at the time, before the last election, that is before the midterm election, that there may be a situation where the US may not fully be able to support Ukraine as Ukraine would want. So this visit would have was an attempt by Zelensky to appeal directly to the sentiments of the United States, both the government and people. So, and I think it went well. The risks in traveling are just logistical, which they managed. And I think he came out with some better commitment, better understanding by the US, United States. So we can look at the situation so that Ukraine, for its war effort, will continue to receive reasonable support or assistance from the US. And of course, when we talk of US, we mean US and its allies.
Indeed. But there are those who cannot help but have the nagging thought at the back of the mind that if this war goes on for a fairly extended period of time, the situation might change. The Russians already indicate that they are prepared for a very long war. And America, if you go by recent history, America has not really, completely shown that it is prepared to go for the long haul right to the end. The Russians, on the other hand, have. The Americans backed out of Afghanistan. We both remember what happened last August, the way they left Afghanistan. Before that, the way they abandoned Syria and the Kurds under President Trump. And so there are those who are saying, look, if we don't take advantage of the fact that, if the Ukrainians don't take advantage of the fact that, they are ahead right now, in the long run, as you called it, the internal American political dynamics might force a difference in plan.
Yeah, we know the stories about, just as you've analyzed it, the US will go a long way, but there's always somewhere that they will probably not give in as much as they gave when the crisis was at its peak or started. And that applies to both combatants. Russia doesn't actually need or want a very long drawn war, because that draws on its own economics, dynamic, politics, military might, and so on. So nobody wins, nobody gains by a long drawn battle or long drawn war situation. All of us know that. They also know it. They can make statements to say that they're preparing for a long haul, but we know that is all just baloney. The situation is affecting them. They are not having the military successes that they anticipated. There are consequences, economic, political, diplomatic consequences of this situation. They being seen as the aggressor. So I'm sure that any opening to really call all this to an end would be taken up by both parties, by all the parties concerned. Just that my sense is that because this war started with an aggressive action from Russia, The only way that it could be seen that all the parties or the war that key parties want to end it is that there must be at least a statement of an intention to roll back the aggression. Talking of intention to negotiate is different from intention to roll back the aggression, because you have to roll back the aggression so that the negotiation can meaningfully begin to manifest or to at least be addressed.
Indeed, that is true. But we'll wait and see how it unfolds in the new year. Ambassador Ayalog, thank you for your time and compliments of the season once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
And after the break, Ukrainian President Zelensky seeks Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's help with a peace plan. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. A Ukrainian artillery brigade fired shells from Bakhmut, targeting Russian positions around the Donbas frontline town. Since August, Russian forces have been bogged down in a costly and extended fight for Bakhmut, a Donetsk region or industrial town with a pre-war population of around 70,000. The eastern Ukrainian city that has become the target of Russian attempts to advance in fighting that has killed thousands of soldiers. An advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of wiping out Bakhmut, criticizing those calling for Kiev to seek peace talks with Russia. And President Volodymyr Zelensky says he was relying on India's help to implement a peace formula during a phone call with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The call comes as New Delhi seeks to boost trade ties with Moscow after becoming one of the largest buyers of Russian oil, defying Western sanctions and providing a vital financial lifeline to Russian President Vladimir Putin as the Kremlin wages a war against Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky wrote on social media, "I announced the peace formula and now count on India's participation in its implementation. I also thank Mr. Modi for humanitarian aid and support in the United Nations." In a statement following the call, the Indian government said Mr. Modi had repeated his calls for an immediate cessation of hostilities and to revert to dialogue and diplomacy. The statement adds that Prime Minister Modi also conveyed India's support for any peace efforts. Mr. Zelensky presented a 10-point peace formula to world leaders at the Group of 20 summit in Bali, Indonesia in November. India assumes the G20 presidency this month and will hold it until next year. Let's talk now to Chukwemeka Eze, former lecturer, Diplomacy and Consular Relations Law at the Faculty of Law, Nasarawa State University in Kefi. He joins us virtually from Abakaliki in Ebonyi State. Compliments of the season, Mr. Eze. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Merry Christmas.
Let's begin from this help that Mr. Zelensky is asking for with his peace formula. He presented this peace formula, as we've reported, last month at the G20. India is at the head of G20 right now. But how far can this peace formula go, or this peace plan go, in the face of other, shall we say, currents that are within the same space fighting for attention?
I think the peace formula being recommended by Zelensky will not go far because the G20 will not determine the outcome of the war. Definitely, Russia will need to speak with the United States of America, speak with France, and possibly the European Union. There is no portion where efforts are being made that should be ignored. Because of the commercial relationship between India and Russia, Modi can make an impact by talking to Putin. But I don't think that alone will solve the problem, but it will go a long way in making an effort, an input into the process. But on the other hand, you are aware that Ukraine is convening a peace summit in February 2023. And that peace summit is also intended to bring about peace. That one also will not definitely bring about the peace. Ukraine is recommending the United Nations Secretary General to drive the peace efforts. I doubt whether Russia will submit to the United Nations Secretary General driving it until it meets the purpose for which it has launched the war. Russia wants to be in possession of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, parts of Kherson, and Donbass, as well as Crimea, which the world seems to have allowed Russia to take. So until Russia occupies these places without serious questioning, it may not be interested in engaging fully with Ukraine for peace. And the Russian Foreign Minister, Lavrov, has given an ultimatum to Ukraine. And you are aware that the Patriot missile, which the United States has agreed to send to Ukraine, will take them at least 6 months before those who will operate it will be able to learn how to operate it. So Russia wants to end this war as soon as possible. And that is the essence of giving this ultimatum to Ukraine. Substantially, critical infrastructure in Ukraine have been destroyed. At least about 9 million people cannot use electricity. They've been returned to the Stone Age. And within the next 6 months, nobody knows the amount of destruction. If 3/4 of Ukraine is destroyed, definitely they will surrender. So all these efforts being made by India and some other countries, they are good, but I don't think they will definitely determine the cost of it.
Quite a lot of people, analysts like you and others, had talked about the coup, if you like, the diplomatic coup that Mr. Zelensky achieved by being able to go to the United States in person to appeal to the political establishment and to its people for continued help, especially after the Republicans had indicated that perhaps the support would not be as robust as it had been under Democrats' control of both the White House and the Congress. Do you think, because the Patriot missile you just referenced was one of the things that he brought back from there, the promise that it would be sent to Ukraine was one of the things that he brought back from there. Do you think that he did, at the end of the day, get something that could sustain Ukraine, even if while efforts are on to negotiate some kind of peace, regardless of whatever the flaws may have been?
Yes, I think that's really a diplomatic coup, but how far can it go? It will take at least 6 months to supply the Patriot missiles. And Russia said they will destroy the Patriot missile. I don't really know where to be located and whether Russia will be able to locate it and destroy it before it starts, the use of it begins. But without putting foot on the ground, the United States have limitations as to how far they can go. Ukraine has also its own limit. If it takes 6 months to get such a very important equipment as Patriot missile, then what happens between January and June if it is supplied in June? This is something that is between 6 months and 1 year. So will the war not end before June? So your guess is good as mine. So I don't know to the extent that will help Ukraine in the short run. It will certainly help Ukraine in the long run, especially with the bipartisan support of the United States Congress. So that means the aid will keep flowing. But it requires those who feel the pinch more are those in Ukraine. And without American soldiers putting foot on the ground, there is a level of suffering to which those in Ukraine can take. If it gets to a point that 3/4 of Ukraine cannot use electricity have been returned to stone age. And the Patriot missiles have not arrived to be able to intercept the missiles being sent by Russia. Then that means Zelensky will have no option than to throw in the towel. But this is a guess on my part. But they really need weapons that will sustain them within the next 6 months before the coming of the Patriot missile. But the bipartisan support from the Congress is a booster so that Zelensky can plan ahead as it relates to this war. But I think Russia is not ready to allow this war to go for as long as one had thought before. Having stationed some missiles in Belarus, I think we'll get to a point missiles will be running into Ukraine, both from Belarus and from Russia. And I doubt whether Ukraine will be able to withstand this level of attack when it will come against.
Both sides are sending mixed messages. On the one hand, the Russians say, well, we are willing to negotiate. It's the other side who's not able to, or who is not willing to negotiate with us. And then that is followed by a barrage of missile attacks on several cities in Ukraine. Then on the other hand, Ukraine talks about having a peace plan that it wants help with implementing. But at the same time, it is also seeking for Russia's expulsion from the UN Security Council and from the United Nations in general. This mixed messaging makes diplomacy even more difficult to achieve in what is already a very difficult situation.
Yes, I agree with you, but they know what they are doing. They are in a combat, and certainly each side will want to get advantage of the other. But let me quickly say that nobody will expel Russia from the United States Security Council. It will not happen. So, but that is the message from Ukraine.
Why do you say it will never happen?
The other four permanent members will not be able. It will take a unanimous decision of the 5 permanent powers to expel a member of the United Nations. So it's not a tea party. The other 4, if it were possible, they would have at least suspended Russia. But even to suspend Russia, they have not been able to achieve it. They have not even mooted the idea. And if they will do so, it will not be because of the call from Ukraine. They can do that with G20. They can do that with Russia is no longer a member of G7. When it was G8, Russia had been suspended or even expelled as a result of its annexation of Crimea. So you can't toy with when it comes to the United Nations. The United Nations Charter is such a document that it takes a lot of processes before something like that. If it were not a member of the Security Council, permanent member of the Security Council, that could have been possible. But let's take it away from that. Russia truly does not want to negotiate yet. If it wants to negotiate, it has a way of communicating that to the United States. It wants to see whether it can wholly take control of those areas it had recently annexed. For instance, Kherson, it is occupying just part of Kherson now. If it takes, remember it withdrew from Kherson. So it needs to completely take over those areas and ensure that they are no longer threatened. Then when you want to negotiate with Russia, Russia will say we are ready. And it will ensure that because of its local law that has annexed those areas, it will tell you that there is no way the law will be abrogated. So I don't think Russia is ready to negotiate. And Russia sees Ukraine as a country it can defeat. There is nothing before Russia saying that it cannot defeat. Ukraine. It thinks that if Ukraine is proving more stubborn, it can exploit more weapons. It has more weapons in its arsenal, and it is taking them little by little. It is stationing, for instance, in Belarus, it already has something that can carry missile warhead. So it is preparing. So I don't think Russia is, no matter the message it is giving out now, it is not ready to negotiate, because a phone call from Putin to Biden can start the negotiation process. Sending Lavrov to the United States can start the negotiation. Speaking to Macron to speak with Biden can start the negotiation. Speaking to Germany to speak to US can start the negotiation. Russia has not taken any of these steps. So I don't believe that Russia is ready to negotiate. Ukraine is the victim. Even if it says it wants to negotiate, Russia will say yes, then you must give up all the areas we have annexed. So that is not a good point for Ukraine to negotiate. So Ukraine has a little to determine whether negotiations should start or not. It's Russia that holds the East.
That is a grim description of the way things are, Mr. Eze, as we come to the end of the year. But I'm sure that those who are listening to you know that a lot of what you're saying is actually the fact. This is reality. And when we get to this level of diplomacy, definitely the reality check is always important. Let me thank you for your time and for your perspective this morning, and to again wish you compliments of the season. Do enjoy the rest of the holidays. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Let's look at a couple of other stories, this time in China, which will drop quarantine requirements for international arrivals from January the 8th, 2023, in a major step towards reopening its borders that have been shut from the rest of the world for nearly 3 years. Inbound travelers will only be required to show a negative COVID test result obtained within 48 hours before departure, and they are subject to 5 days of hotel quarantine and 3 days of self-isolation at home, and that's according to China's National Health Commission. According to the announcement, restrictions on airlines over the number of international flights and passenger capacity will also be removed. The easing of borders is part of a broader move by China to dismantle what was left of its long-held zero-COVID policy, which was abruptly abandoned early this month following nationwide protests over its heavy social and economic toll. The sudden policy U-turn caught the public and the country's fragile health system unprepared, causing widespread shortages of cold and fever medicine and leaving hospitals scrambling to cope with an unprecedented surge of infections. Having rolled back lockdowns, mass testing, and allowed positive patients to quarantine at home, the government is now scrapping other remaining preventive measures, including contact tracing. China has sealed its borders since March 2020 to prevent the spread of the virus, keeping itself in global isolation, even as the rest of the world reopened and moved on from the pandemic. Meanwhile, China's economy is under severe strain as a wave of COVID cases sweeps across the country. Since the world's second largest economy drastically eased its COVID restrictions, there's been no clear data on the extent of the virus spread on the national level. But several cities and provinces have said they were seeing tens of thousands of new cases per day. The rapid spread of infection has driven many people indoors and emptied shops and restaurants. Factories and companies are also forced to shut down or cut production because of more workers getting sick. The Chinese economy was already struggling when Beijing abruptly pivoted from its stringent zero-COVID policy. Retail sales had contracted in November because of widespread lockdowns, and unemployment had surged to the highest level in 6 months. Top leaders have signaled recently that they would shift focus back to growth next year and have bet on a relaxation of pandemic restrictions to lift the economy. And when we return on the program, we'll have John McWa join us. Plus, Russia sees socio-economic shift. That's a negative one following conflict with Ukraine. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. And as promised, teased, here's Ini John Mekwa.
Good morning.
Ini, compliments once again.
Once again, compliments to you too.
Japan's Impex signed a 20-year LNG deal with Venture Global. Japan wasn't in the mix of all of this.
Yes.
So how come?
Everybody is desperate for gas now. As we know, there's shortage with the war, and every attention seems to be turning to Europe, starving other countries.
Exactly, because Europe can afford to pay.
Exactly, because according to the news that we have, there are vessels lining up to offload into Europe. And you know that especially countries like Germany, they're trying to stock up for the winter for the eventual
when they cut off from Russia.
So Japan, I think they're just taking a safe step. When I sign 20-year deal with you, it means for 20 years, if you go against that contract, you are owing me and you will face the consequences. So they're just trying to secure their supply of gas, something that was not really necessary before now.
Exactly.
Yes, but now has become necessary because the money is in Europe, and every buyer, every seller will want to head to Europe. So please, let's just try and secure power or energy for our country. That's what Japan is just trying to do with that 20-year deal.
Now, a number of economic changes. I mean, later on, towards the end of the show, I'm going to talk about how Russia has had to shift its economy and some of the economic trends. But everywhere, people are having to do that, including here.
Including here, especially here. So I'll just read out some numbers. First of all, you know, when we started this program, we talked about the issue of wheat.
Yes.
I think a lot of us, I'm not saying a lot of people, a lot of us do not know how important wheat is in our meals, on our menus, you know, where it spreads up to. You thought maybe it was just when you eat wheat bread. That's when you had
the
wheat.
most obvious example.
You didn't know that it was in so many things. So with the war, and of course Ukraine being a major exporter of wheat, we did see that. So this year, so far, we've seen the wheat that Nigeria has purchased has gone down from almost 900 billion naira to just about 753 billion naira. That means we've not been able to get enough supply. So obviously the price has gone up.
Right.
Because we are even spending more for less quantity. And so that means that even the suppliers in Nigeria have had to face that. Now, another thing that we have had to face has been the issue of jet fuel. Diesel.
You mean had to face, or we are still facing?
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're still facing
I'm sorry about that.
I mean,
yes.
Most people know that now.
Yes.
Right.
So some people say they used to buy, some manufacturers and companies say they used to buy diesel in trucks when it was about 270. Now it's about 800. You know, we talk about petrol so much, we seem to lose focus on diesel.
The others, right.
And diesel is affecting all of us because the man who's manufacturing even the bread you're talking about is most likely using diesel and not petrol.
Right.
They said they used to buy it in trucks when it was 270. Now they can't afford. They buy it in drums. And guess what? They're even paying much more than what they were spending when they were buying it in trucks. And of course, that also affects. Remember there was a time the banks had to close at 2 o'clock?
Yes.
Because of diesel?
Yes.
And of course, a lot of manufacturers had to work some days and not work some days.
Yeah,
not because of COVID.
Yes, but
not because of COVID.
The supply. They couldn't pay for it.
Exactly. Then what about what's going on with, this is travel period, people want to spend time with, what's going on with our air ticket now? I think at the beginning of this year, we could buy a ticket for about 25,000 naira.
Absolutely.
30,000 naira. Now you're talking about 70,000 naira.
80,000, 100, depending on where you're going.
Exactly, depending on where you're going and how much demand. And that doesn't assure you that you will not get disappointed anyway.
Absolutely. There's a lot on all of this, and at least a significant proportion of it is due to this conflict in Ukraine. Either directly or by... We were talking about supply side headwinds earlier on before the show began. One would just be hoping that in 2023 a solution is found to this, so that life can return to some sort of
normal. Yes.
Indeed. Thank you, Ini. Ini, as usual, with the analysis. More of that, of course, will come on Business Morning later on. The Russian Football Union, now talking about the sports out of this conflict, has announced that a final decision regarding its possible withdrawal from UEFA in order to join the Asian Football Confederation would be made tomorrow. UEFA and FIFA barred Russian clubs and teams from participating in international competitions owing to the situation around Ukraine. The Russian team was unable to take part in the playoff qualification for the World Cup in Qatar. The Russian national team did not participate as well in the draw for the 2024 European Championships. RFU President Alexander Dukov says the step would be unprecedented, but that his organization does not see light at the end of the tunnel regarding the lifting of the sanctions in the near future. And Umar Kremlev, the Russian who heads the International Boxing Association, says that plans by the International Olympic Committee to remove boxing from the Paris 2024 Olympics in 2024 represent the latest move in a campaign of manipulating athletes and sports for geopolitical purposes. Mr. Kremlev also claims that the IOC is attempting to undermine the leadership of the International Boxing Association. The motivation for IOC's potential ban on boxing is understood to be linked to a sponsorship deal the IBA signed with Russian energy giant Gazprom, though Mr. Kremlev has suggested that the measures are also being considered owing to his ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin. And finally on the program, is karma hitting in on Russia? Or perhaps the question is, are they feeling the pinch of the war they started? Well, for all we know, Russia is continuing to see a socio-economic shift 8 months or so after it launched the special military operation in Ukraine, actually 10 months. Moscow's Red Square has always been one of the Russian prettiest sights during New Year festivities, but celebrations are muted this year due to the ongoing military operations in Ukraine, which began on February the 24th. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands, have perished on both sides since February the 24th, while the fear of conflict has displaced millions from their homes. Andrei Kramer from the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia in Donetsk says, quote, Russia is changing along with the entire planet. Many people who were not prepared for the changes have had to leave. They are not comfortable at this moment as they were raised in an environment that has not insisted on any patriotic elements. The economic impact of Western sanctions has also led to a seismic shift in Russia. Many Western brands and factories have exited the country following the outbreak of conflict, fueling expectations of an imminent collapse of the Russian economy. But that has not happened yet. That's where we wrap up the program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Nadi Akiri-Golwale. There are updates throughout the day, but do watch out for the World Today at 5. So now, have yourselves a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.